Welcome back to yet another miniature engine episode. This time I'm going to be building a mini 4-stroke engine. And I really love these little engine kits because these are great projects for a parent to do with their kids, especially if you want to get them involved in like engineering, mechanics, and building things, which to me is an extremely important skill. This engine comes in individual pieces. As you put the engine together and you're assembling everything, each part kind of has its own story. You can kind of figure out as you piece it together what role each individual part plays in the operation of the engine. This is like a camshaft gear, and this is this little baby camshaft. And once you get that together and you get the belt on there and the engine is running, you can kind of figure out what part does what. And that can be applied to just about anything else that you work on. There's no better feeling of accomplishment than seeing what you built run. So let me start by throwing this thing together. And it comes with instructions, but who needs that? No, I'm just kidding. You actually do need the instructions. And I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with this engine, but the first thing I do have to do is build it. This is gonna be the assembly of the crankshaft. Get that little tiny little piston. These are all our parts for our crankshaft assembly. All right, there goes our crankshaft assembly. Their little piston. Now onto the main body assembly. There's the lower half of the block. And this is a sleeved engine. Slide that sleeve right in there. Everything fits like so tight. There's the lower half, then the actual cylinder block. Boom, right there. We're gonna push the crankshaft down now to make sure both sides of the crankshaft are aligned together, and then we're going to tighten up this little set screw. All right, now that we have the crankshaft in place, now we're going to put in the bottom cover, which goes in just like this with 4 screws. Starting to get some weight to it now. Starting to feel like a real engine. Next, we're going to assemble the head. This is the actual head with no components. And this is the camshaft right here. Get this little tiny little baby camshaft. It's so tiny. This is what we need. Cylinder cap components. We got some rocker arms, some valve buckets, and a couple other parts in there. First thing I want to do is identify which one of these is the intake and exhaust. This one's the exhaust and this one's the intake. So I marked it with a blue China marker. That way we know that is the intake. That's 45-degree cut there, and this one's a 32-degree cut, and that's the difference. All right, first thing I'm gonna do is drop in the little valve buckets right here. And this kind of looks a lot like my Supra. Supra has like the same thing, the valve and a spring and a little like collar, and then it has a valve bucket on top with the shim. And basically, when the camshaft pushes these valves open, they open on the other side. Now I'm gonna throw the rocker arms together. All right, now it's time to put the camshaft together. Then our pin. Then we need a C-clip behind the cam gear first. And then we're gonna put the cam gear in place. And the way this works is the mark goes down and the lobe goes up. Now we got one more C-clip that goes in front of the sprocket. Now we're going to take our little camshaft assembly and put it right into the head. Just give it a nice little push. All right, our camshaft's installed. All we have left now are the rocker arms. Here's the second C-clip on the camshaft. Now the bearing for the other side of the camshaft. This is, I guess you could call it the camshaft bearing. On this rocker arm lever, the thicker side goes down toward the head. And then we're going to slide the last rocker arm. I marked the intake rocker arm with blue. Now I'm going to attach the exhaust side rocker arm, which is a little bit darker than the intake side. And that's kind of how it is on real engines. A lot of times, like the exhaust cam is a little darker color than the intake side for some reason. And now I'm going to put the rocker arm pivot, which is that little thing in the center, and the fat side goes down. So it kind of goes in just like this. I'm going to put the last bolt that holds the rocker arms in place. Tighten that up. Not too tight because they're really little screws. Next thing I need to do is install the smallest head gasket I've ever seen. It just kind of falls right into that recess, and then install the head on the engine. The flywheel is going to be facing forward and that little exhaust port facing that way. And then install the 4 head bolts. Tighten those down evenly in a crisscross fashion. Alright, so the whole engine is now put together. It looks pretty cool. Next thing I need to do is just attach the whole muffler assembly. And here's the actual muffler housing right here. And it kind of looks cool if you look inside there. See all the little channels and the chambers and how it deadens the sound as the exhaust moves through. So it goes on just like this. Next is this muffler cover, Toyan power boost box. This just takes 6 screws. Can't forget the nice polished exhaust tip. And I'm going to tighten it up with the pliers and a paper towel so we don't scratch it up. Now we're going to assemble the fan drive belt and the timing belt. And the first thing we need is this idler pulley. Protruding end goes inwards toward the block. You have to look really closely because it's super small. Next thing we have to install is going to be the fan pulley / hub assembly. And we take these little bearings, tiny little bearings, somehow slide them onto that. They're so tiny. We got 1 bearing and then our second bearing, and then we slide that whole bearing assembly with the shaft and the spacer right inside of that hub. And I don't know what I'm going to do here, but I'm going to maybe just try to press it down so it's flush. Yep, that worked. Alright, next thing I have to do is install this timing belt, and all you have to do is line up these marks, put both of these marks pointing downward, the camshaft gear, and this kind of just falls right in between the intake and exhaust stroke, just kind of stays there. The crankshaft is a tricky one, so you got to put it pointing straight down and then hold the belt on the top, and this is how I do it, kind of using 1 finger like this. Take the slack out of it, push that in, and then slide in my fan pulley, line up the screw, and that's our complete working assembly with that timing belt doing what it should, controlling the valves and the lifters. Now it's time to install the cooling fan, and when I first saw that this thing used a cooling fan, I wondered how it cooled, but after looking at it closer, I see that the cooling fan blows air right over the cylinder, right through those fins. The fan consists of 7 of these individual blades, and I found the easiest way to get these on is to put the screw in the blade first and then just screw that into this pulley, and then once you get that screw in the pulley a little bit, then push the fan blade down in the groove and use the Allen wrench to tighten it up all the way. And just remember, these are really small screws, so don't over tighten them. They just go like a little bit snug to where they kind of stop, and that's it. And that's what the fan looks like when it's all done. Looks pretty impressive, actually. That's it for the fan. Onto the carburetor. There's all the little pieces. What we need to start putting the carburetor together is the carburetor block. Put 2 screws in there, and then you're going to sandwich together a gasket, a plate, a gasket, a plate, and a gasket, and slide that right on the carburetor body, just like this. Tighten that up. Next, we have to take the little throttle cam and get our O-ring. Push that O-ring right into that groove. Next, we're going to get the needle. I believe this is the idle needle. And then we're going to put this idle needle right into that cylinder. And that's going to be our idle adjustment screw. Next thing we're going to do is attach our throttle lever. And just tighten that set screw down in there. Kind of makes its own threads until you feel it touch. And then just snug it a little bit. Don't over tighten it. Next, we're going to drop in the spring for the throttle cam, and then drop in that throttle cam that we just got finished assembling. Push it in there with that groove facing the back, and then we're gonna put in our retainer screw with that little spring right in there, and just tighten that down a little bit by hand, and it holds that in place with the groove. That's going to be your idle adjustment speed, and this is going to be your idle mixture adjustment. At full throttle, it's going to be wide open, and then this is going to be your idle. Next is going to be the fuel delivery side of things, starting with the injection nozzle. We're just going to put this little nut on there, and then this little seal that seals the injection nozzle against the body of the carburetor, screwed right into the side of the body of the carburetor. Very carefully, because you have a adjustment needle for the idle right on the other side of that. So if you don't have this centered, you could damage that needle. And the reason that that little nut is there, and it looks like it lines up pretty good, is we want this hole kind of in that 45-degree position. So you put it in the position you want it, right about there, and then we're going to tighten down that little nut against the carburetor body. Now that we have the clock position of our injection nozzle set, we're going to install our needle valve base, and a little seal goes on that base. Thread it in, make sure you don't cross thread it, and now we're going to snug that up so the inlet is parallel with the injection nozzle. Next, we're going to install the high-speed needle valve and drop that right into the valve body. And sometimes I put a little bit of silicone spray on there, but sometimes you just got to give it a little push and a twist. And I usually just seat it a little bit lightly, you don't want to damage it, and then back it out like a couple of turns. And there it is. The last thing we have now is just our fuel inlet nipple, and that threads right into that valve body, and just carefully tighten that down. Do not over tighten this, because these threads are pretty small. Just tighten it to where it's kind of snug, and if it leaks later, just give it another little turn. It should just be in there snug. Next up is just our valve cover. Just gonna go in like this, drop it down there, and tighten up all 4 screws. I always like to tighten them in a crisscross pattern. Good practice, so you don't warp any parts. The engine's almost complete. The last thing that I need to do is hook up the starter components and mount this engine. Start it up and see how it runs. So we're gonna mount the starter into our starter bracket, put our screws in place, install the starter gear on the starter. The starter shim, it goes in just like this. The starter motor with the bracket, get that belt nice and tight. And that starter motor is pretty cool, because it even has the starter clutch. Once the engine starts and it's turning, it disengages the starter, and as soon as that starter turns over, it engages that starter clutch and cranks the engine. The engine's all done. It looks fantastic. Now it's time to get this thing mounted, started, and see how it runs. The fuel I'm going to use is going to be this 20% nitro, 14% oil. The manual recommends 20 to 25% nitro, so this should be pretty good. The only issue I ran into is it looks like I'm missing the starter components that hook up to this starter motor and this glow plug, but I have an idea in mind that I think is going to work. I have this engine all set up, ready to start, but before I do so, I want to introduce you to Skillshare, the sponsor of this episode. I personally reached out to them because I thought they were such a good fit for this type of episode. I do a lot of crazy builds here on my channel. But at one point, I myself was a beginner trying to figure things out. The best thing that you can do is speed up that learning process as much as possible, and Skillshare gives you what you need to do that. They offer classes on everything from diesel to combustion engines, automotive repair and maintenance, engineering, how to organize your life, and everything in between. The first 1,000 people who use the link below are gonna get 2 months free, And in those 2 months, you can take as many courses as you want. And one of the nice things that I really like about their website is each course has timestamps, so you can jump to exactly the part of the program that you want to see. After I registered on the website, I ended up taking a class on how to organize my projects more effectively to address one of the biggest issues that I have, making more YouTube videos. If you're interested in learning how to build stuff or do just crazy over-the-top projects like I do, or even building and designing engines like this, Skillshare is the place to go. So don't forget to check out that link below. So that being said, time to start this engine. Let's see what it does. All right, here we go. First startup of the 4-stroke methanol engine. Okay, so it looks like it ran, and it ran really smooth. It was idling at like, I don't know, 1,000 RPM. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna get the high-speed camera set up again, remove this valve cover, remove this muffler, see if I can maybe get some flames coming out of the exhaust. Maybe I'll try this 30% nitro, which the manual says not to use. And then after that, I'm gonna look a little closer into something I found really impressive when I was building this. This engine uses these little valve buckets, kind of like the Supra does. And I would like to see how those valve buckets are working with the camshaft and the valves in slow motion. So now I'm gonna start it up with the 30% nitro and take a good look at the exhaust, see if we can see some fire, see how this looks. Well, that started up a lot easier than with the 20% nitro. Just like a see-through engine, when I put that 90% nitro, it was idling like boom, 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 like a heartbeat. Yeah, that sounds better. That sounds a lot meaner. Sounds like it has way more power than the other fuel. Let's see if we can see some fire out of the exhaust now. That was the engine running on the 30% nitro that the owner's manual says not to use. And the thing was a beast. Did you hear how that thing sounded? It sounded almost like a 2-cycle. I mean, and it started right up with the extra nitro content. But unfortunately, I still didn't see any flames coming out. Saw some smoke and some other stuff. But now I'm gonna move on to what I'm interested in, and that is those valve buckets and those rocker arms and kind of how they're working together with the little camshaft. Because I know on the Supra, it has those same valve buckets, and when the camshaft is turning, the valve bucket is spinning. And I have a feeling that this engine's doing the same thing, so I'm gonna set up the high-speed camera right here, take a look inside, start it one more time, and see what the valves, rocker arms, and valve buckets are doing. It's just so cool to see on the high-speed camera how the valves, rocker arms, and the camshaft are all working together. You can also see how the drive belt is working. Now that I found to be pretty cool. I've been wondering about that ever since I adjusted the valves on the Supra, and I noticed that as the camshaft was spinning, the bucket was spinning, and I always thought it was because the camshaft was slightly offset to the bucket, and it was just made that way to make that little bucket spin. But from looking at this engine, I can see that that spin looks like it's coming from the valve having momentum. As the rocker arm is coming back up, the valve is still kind of moving downward for a split second, and then as it comes up, it spins. I don't know where that spinning force is coming from. Maybe it's coming from the way the spring is cut. I'm not really sure. And that brings this episode to an end. That's it for this engine. I just want to say one more time, I think that this particular engine kit is an awesome project for parents and their kids. So I'm gonna leave a link in the description below to this engine. If you use my coupon code WARPED, you get 10% off anything on the site. Thanks for watching. Tell me what you think about this engine. Also tell me how you think I could get fire out of this exhaust port, because I couldn't get any fire this time. That's about it. Adios. See you next time.